Well, hello, church. Today's our third in our series leading us up to Easter. We're giving each of these a title that's easy to remember, and therefore it's a name of a popular book or a movie or a line in a poem. Today is Undaunted Courage. It's a wonderful book, by the way, by Stephen Ambrose about the Lewis and Clark expedition and the way that it opened up the West. Fascinating book. I hope that you get it and read it. But the title or the book have nothing to do with the lesson. It's just to help you find us a little bit easier. But also, undaunted courage is what we see in the life of Daniel, a young man in exile who does not have a king, but who is waiting for his king, Jehovah, Yahweh, to appear and free his people. But in the meantime, finds himself in a very wicked, evil place and has been in that place for almost his entire life. He arrived sometime between the ages of 12 and 15, if we understand the words that are used to describe him correctly. And we're going to find him today in his late 70s. First of all, between chapters 4 and 5 in Daniel, there's a gap of about 30 years. A whole lot has happened. A whole lot of change has happened. Nebuchadnezzar is dead, and so is his son. His grandson was a mere infant when he came to the throne, only to be quickly overthrown by Nabonidus. Nabonidus' son ruled as a co-regent with his, or co-king, along with his father, and that man's name was Belteshazzar, who is the star, kinda, of this story until Daniel shows up. Belshazzar, I should say. Belteshazzar was what they called Daniel. Belshazzar. Now, I say all of that just to help the historians figure it out. The rest of us think that all sounds crazy, and you're pretty much correct. In this chapter, by the way, historians, once again, you will see that Belshazzar refers to Nebuchadnezzar as his father. Daniel refers to him that way as well. But he was only his father in the sense that he was a significant predecessor. And that's the way they used that term. All right. But before we get into our story, we do need to talk about another thing. Not as arcane and difficult as who succeeded who in the Babylonian or Chaldean Empire, but about a word. The word is bling. Believe it or not, bling bling is the way it first appeared in the Oxford English Dictionary only in the late 1990s. It is a new word. It was slang. Now it's a word. It means extra, unnecessary, shiny, glittery adornment. For example, women have long enjoyed painting their nails, but if you also add glitter, stones, let your nails grow out to long, super long, or weird shapes, that would be bling. You can have a shirt with a couple of stitches in it or decorations in it. That's one thing, but if it's got shiny sparkles all over it, that would be bling. You just add over the top decor, like gold sinks or weird colors. That can be bling. Bling can also be awards. You might want to do this for your own edification. Look up a picture, go to any of the search engines you like, any of the AI agents that you like, and ask for a picture of General Dwight D. Eisenhower, 4-star general of the United States, in his dress uniform. Eisenhower was one of the most beloved and effective and successful generals in the United States history. And you see him there as a height of his power, 4 stars each shoulder. And he has about 3 rows of medals, ribbons. That's all right there. Now, ask it to look for any 2-star, 3-star, or 4-star general of the last 20 years. And you'll see that the left side of the uniform is full of bling and awards and ribbons. And it's not a secret. The grunts, the enlisted people know this, that top officers fly into different areas, battle zones and the like, land, have dinner, award each other combat ribbons, and they fly out. They got the bling. It's sad and it's a bit ridiculous, but that's what bling really is. Our culture pushes us to get and display bling. People watch shows like Real Housewives that are full of bling but don't have a real housewife in them. And this, we could go on for hours, but it's important that you understand this. We are repelled by bling and attracted by it at the same time. Babylon was all about the bling, and had been, at least since the first time we got to meet Babylon, way back in the book of Esther. Nebuchadnezzar apparently had very elaborately carved walls. He had the hanging gardens of Babylon, which by themselves is worth a half hour's discussion. The book of Esther, however, shows us an early scene. Xerxes, or in the older versions of the Bible, it'll call him his more Hebrew name, Ahasuerus, but Xerxes was the king. And the book opens with a party that has been going on for months. It is a drinking, carousing party that has been going on for months. And in fact, the only way they're going to end it is that they throw another month on it for the party is now ending party. It's obscene at every level. Constant bling. Xerxes' palace had black and white marble floors in which were embedded gems and jewels of all kind to make sure it sparkled no matter where you were in the room. Everything was about the bling. People are attracted to it unless they understand the shallowness of bling. Belshazzar, in Daniel chapter 5, was very impressed by himself. He thought he was the greatest. His son was his co-king. That's why later on, by the way, when he offers an award, he only offers to make the person the third highest ruler in the land, when typically, when Babylonian kings get off the reservation, they'll yell, "I'll make you the second in the kingdom." Belshazzar really wanted everybody else to be as impressed with him as he was. That's not unusual with kings. I recently was listening to an audiobook by Bill Bryson, one of my favorite authors. When he was talking about the things we used to eat that we don't eat anymore. And he used as an illustration King Henry VIII's menu for holiday meals. I won't go over it. It's extensive, horrible stuff, long list of things we wouldn't even eat today. But the very fact is the volume of food was insane, jaw-dropping. That's typical among kings, rulers, to have all the bling, all the shiny things there. So Daniel 5 opens with Belshazzar's over-the-top party. Belshazzar must have felt that the people hadn't quite understood how powerful and wonderful he was. So he told the servants to go get the gold and the silver. Listen very carefully. Go get the gold and the silver that his father, Nebuchadnezzar, stole from the temple in Jerusalem and bring it out. Well, why? Well, the bling, of course. It was a sign of his power. He would be able to parade the goblets and the gold articles that belonged to Yahweh and use them for himself. In fact, he did. He had them drink from the goblets and praise their gods. Now think of the hubris here. Think of the narcissism. Think of the egotism that this shows. It's more, not only egotistic, it's egoistic, and it's horrible. Here are things that are reserved for the priest of the high God, Yahweh. And he is drinking at them in a drunken feast and telling everyone, I'm doing this for our gods to show the superiority of our gods. And suddenly, the fingers of a man's hand appear and write 3 measurements on the wall. Belshazzar and his guests are terrified, understandably, and he sends for his wise men, magicians, astrologers, and sorcerers, and tells them that whoever can tell him what this means, well, they'll be made third in the kingdom. In fact, they will get bling. Look at chapter 5 and verse 7. The king summoned the enchanters, astrologers, diviners, or diviners, Then he said to these wise men of Babylon, whoever reads this writing and tells me what it means will be clothed in purple, will have a gold chain placed around his neck. He will be made the third highest ruler in the kingdom. Bling. Who could turn down bling? But there's a very consistent thing in the book of Daniel, and that is that all of the wise men of Babylon aren't. They always fail. They don't know the interpretation of this dream, Nebuchadnezzar, nor do we know the interpretation of that dream, Nebuchadnezzar. And now they're saying, no, we don't know what's going on here either. His queen then suggests, I've heard there was this guy, verse 11, which is read to you earlier. There is a man in your kingdom who has the spirit of the holy gods in him. In the time of your father, he was found to have insight and intelligence and wisdom like that of the gods. Your father, King Nebuchadnezzar, appointed him chief of the magicians, enchanters, astrologers, and diviners. So they called for Daniel. Pay attention to this. Pay attention to what she says. Verse 12. He did this because Daniel, whom the king called Belteshazzar, was found to have a keen mind, knowledge, understanding, and also the ability to interpret dreams, explain riddles, solve difficult problems. Call for Daniel. He will tell you what this writing means. Now, why do I want to point that out? Because of what's missing. You might not notice it at first, but we really do need to talk about what's missing. Rather like the story of Jesus' life, there are huge gaps in the story of Daniel's life that we would like to be filled up. And in fact, later writers did. There's quite a lot of literature out there that comes from ancient and medieval sources of people filling in the gaps with new stories. And if you go to the Apocrypha, you'll find a book, for example, Bel and the Dragon. Well, the Bel there is Belteshazzar, Daniel, and his overcoming of a dragon, and all these stories to show how famous and powerful he was. But in the book of Daniel, we have gaps. But whatever had happened in those tumultuous 30 years from chapter 4 to chapter 5, Daniel's reputation remained intact. That meant he remained a solid, wise contributor to society, even though this was not his society, not the one he wanted to be in. He was locked in there. He only drew the lines that we talked about in the first sermon when he was asked to cross a religious line. Other than that, if the king needs my help, I'll help him. If the chief eunuch needs my help, I'll help him. I will serve whoever I can serve. He was known as a servant to the God of Israel, the very God of Israel, whose treasures were being flaunted and misused. He had not rebelled. He had not led street protest. He had not taken to TikTok videos to own his enemies. He had not attacked the rulers like some street corner prophet. He had just done good where he could. He stayed faithful to God and faithful to himself. That's it. Like the biography of Jesus, it's given in the book of Acts that goes simply, he went about doing good. That must be what's in the gap, because after all these years, not only does the queen remember him, know him, and feel confident calling for him, she even remembers his original name. Did you catch that? Call for Daniel, who Nebuchadnezzar called Belteshazzar. His life had been so powerful, people knew him by his real name after all of these years. Belshazzar calls Daniel before him. Again, remember, Daniel's at least in his 70s, if not up to 80. Belshazzar makes him an offer. Guess what the offer is? Same offers in verse 7. In verse 16, he says, I've heard you're able to give interpretations, that you solve difficult problems. If you can read this writing and tell me what it means, you'll be clothed in purple and have a gold chain placed around your neck, and you'll be made third highest ruler in heaven. In the kingdom. And you might want to look at the next verse and see what Daniel tells him. He says, you can keep that. Daniel was not interested in the bling. He had no interest in the awards, no interest in the glitter, didn't need titles, medals, powers, trophies, displays. Friends, one of the ways we can prepare our hearts for faithful servant to our King who is resurrected and whose celebration of that resurrection we observe every year at Easter is to end our desire for earthly glory and all the bling that so enchants those around us. I have several guitars, about a third of what I used to have. As I get older, I let things go. But a couple of the guitars are really pretty. In fact, you could even say they have bling on them. Decorations up the fretboard or a fancy headstock. There's something you need to know about those guitars. They cost more than the other guitars, but they don't sound better. The bling does not change their character. The bling merely is to make you think they're better than what they are. The famous country music singer Alan Jackson has a Taylor guitar which was made for him, which is the most over-blinged Taylor guitar I've ever seen in my life. Hugely expensive. And he holds it for every concert that he gives. You might have noticed the verb I used there, holds it. He doesn't play it. There may be a couple songs where he'll strum a couple times. Other than that, it's a prop. Bling doesn't really mean anything. It's who you are. The world famous flat picker out of North Carolina was once, he was a blind man, Doc. Everybody called him Doc. He was in New York City and going to play Carnegie Hall. Everybody knew Doc Watson. Everybody wanted to hear Doc Watson. While he was in a room with some adoring fans, one of the guys there said, I would love to play like you do, but I've just got this really cheap, awful guitar. The action's on it terrible. And Doc, being blind, he just said, can I see your guitar? And they handed him the guitar. And he played an amazing set of runs on it. Then quietly just handed it back. And he said, it ain't the guitar. It's not the bling, people. It's who you are and what God you serve. The interpretation of the writing was that Belshazzar had been measured by God, and God was not impressed. Now think of that. The whole party was to get people to think as highly as Belshazzar thought, and God's going, nope, not so much. I've measured you, and in every way I can measure you, you don't measure up. Wow. They're standing before Belshazzar as a man who just doesn't need to get credit. By the way, we try to be that way at our Safe Harbor. We don't copyright my sermons. We don't copyright the videos. We don't copyright my notes. Use them. You don't ever have to attribute them to us. You don't ever have to give us credit. No, use them for our God, our King. I was recently overseas, and the people there that I spoke to 2 to 3 churches a day, almost every day, and they wanted to show me honor, and I really appreciated the kind respect and the way they treated me. But they would call me bishop or pastor or doctor. I'm okay, acceptable for the doctor, but I kept saying no, just Patrick. It was so hard for them to do that because in their culture, it's a very stratified, and you show respect to whom respect is due. But fact is, we have a home in heaven. That's enough. You don't need to call us the special names. You don't need to give us the special titles or the bling. We just want to serve our King. We know the truth. Bling doesn't mean a thing at all. Those fancy nails make typing almost impossible and doing a lot of other things impossible. The fancy hair and the fancy shirts get snagged on stuff. The bling doesn't really help. The more moving parts anything has, the more chances for it to go wrong are. We need to back away. Belshazzar was told that at that very night, his kingdom would be taken from him. He thought he was at the height of King of Kings, nobody bigger than him, nobody better. And God is telling him through Daniel, it's over now. And it was. Outside Babylon, during all this party time, they had not been paying attention. And a two-kingdom group that had united under one leader called the Medes and the Persians, Medes, no relation, different spelling, had been approaching. A river ran under the walls of Babylon and kept fresh water available to the people. They had noticed that the Medes and Persians had been digging an alternate trench. And on that night, they broke the dike, the last remaining dam there, or weir. And now the water goes off that way, and they go under the walls of the city. Walking in the riverbed, they were taking the city at the time Daniel was saying this to Belshazzar. The time that Belshazzar was declaring himself equal and superior to the God of Israel, his kingdom was already fallen. Think about that. It should make us shudder. You know, the fact is, God doesn't always move in a way that we want him to move, nor does he move at the speed we want him to move. And sometimes he doesn't move at the time we want him to move, or acts like he's not moving at all. But when he moves quickly. And kingdoms, empires, cultures, ideas, and programs collapse because God has moved. I'll never forget, my wife and I were only shortly in America in the mid-'80s, late 80s. And we were in a hotel in Terre Haute, Indiana. And we were watching the telly that night as we were getting ready for the next day. And I was going to speak at a local church the next day. And they, on the telly there, we saw the USR vanish. We had grown up with the constant presence of the USSR as our enemy. They were going to be coming through the Fulda Gap in Germany. The ICBMs were going to come over the poles and attack us, and we had to do this, that, and the other. And we'd gone through the nuclear drills as kids. England and Scotland were the same as America, where they told the kids to put their heads under the desk because it's proven fact nuclear energy cannot penetrate melanine. I think it was just so they could find where the bodies were. But we remember walking by fallout shelters, and it was gone. And we hadn't fired a shot. There had been no nuclear weapons going off. It was just over. And I looked at my wife and I said, I'm not really sure what to do or think now. Because without that constant presence of our enemy, there's this void in my life. What do we do? Well, Belshazzar didn't even know recent history. He didn't know who Daniel was. And please take time today to read Daniel chapter 5, verses 18 through 31, where Daniel gives him the history. He says, your father Nebuchadnezzar, that you always talk about, remember, only a father in a predecessor sense. He also ignored God. God gave him help. God offered him help. He refused. So God drove him mad, and he crawled about on all fours and acted like a cow, an ox, until he came to his senses and bowed himself before the true God. And yet, you have not. You know, Daniel had been sidelined for decades. Culture had moved past him. Do you ever feel that culture has moved past you? I remember a couple years ago, my wife and I were in Iowa. Am I correct there? No, I'm not. In Kansas. We were in Kansas. We had stopped for the night, and it was at a university town. So we went downtown to eat. And as we were eating, we couldn't help but notice that everybody walking by had hair that to us was weird. Piercings that to us were weird. Tattoos that to us, weird. Clothes that to us were weird. And I noticed she was looking around and such, and I looked at her and I said, you see all these people? And she goes, yes. And I said, you know what? We're the weirdos. We're the ones who don't fit in. And it's important sometimes to remember, wait a minute, we're not the standard of all history. For Daniel, his culture had moved on. It left him alone, stranded, far from home. no hope, no hope of ever returning to the place of his childhood that he loved. And yet, he remained faithful. That's why we sing songs like, "This world is not my home, I'm just a passing through." Daniel was prepared for the true king. He didn't need what the world had to offer. We see this in the next chapter as well. A quick story will add to this lesson. Daniel's put to the test by his own government. If you have not been, you will be. Because that's the way governments are when it comes to any competing god that goes against whoever they are. Whether they are in Singapore, London, DC, Tokyo, they will put you to the test. Darius the Mede is now ruler over what used to be the Babylonian Empire. He is older man and much, much, much better man than Belshazzar ever was. But he was still a human ruler, full of himself, ready to receive the praise and the glory, ready to receive the bling. Darius, by the way, most historians will call him Darius. So if you ever hear him called that, same guy. Darius recognized Daniel's worth and value and was considering placing him over the entire kingdom. Well, that made the administrators very jealous. Think here, deep state, bureaucrats, people like that. They did not want this outsider, old man, emasculated Jew to be placed over the whole kingdom. So they went in search of something to dig up against Daniel. Now they searched and they searched to try to find something Daniel had done wrong. The same way people do today, by the way, when they want to go after their enemies by digging up a 20-year-old blog post or a 10-year-old tweet or something to destroy their reputation. And we see that happen all the time. And it's as evil and wrong today as it was back then. These men finally concluded they couldn't win that way because, quote, they could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. Finally, these men said, "We will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of God." It's in Daniel chapter 6, verses 4 and 5. It's exactly what they'll do to you too. I can remember I was asked to come to a university in Delaware. Won't name it. Small state. You can probably find it. And they wanted me to come up to talk. There was going to be about how we can get along on campuses being different. You're religious, not religious. Different viewpoints in politics, different viewpoints on social issues. And several people had nominated, I don't know who it was, I don't know very many people up there, that had nominated me to come up and deliver one of the keynotes. So we put it on the schedule a couple years out. And then just about 6-8 weeks before, I got a call. Dr. Meade, we've decided not to invite you. We're disinviting you from coming. I went, that's fine. I've been disinvited before. That's fine. And I didn't ask for an explanation, but I guess they felt like they were going to give it anyway. They said, we had some complaints that you have said some things before about how traditional marriage is the best God's plan A for human beings. And I went, yeah, I've said that. Still believe it. Well, we can't. Well, we've had people, and that was just, so this was a whole seminar on getting along with diverse viewpoints. But I was diverse, so I wasn't allowed to be there. That was fine with me. I got to spend a couple more days at home with my wife. That's a win. But this will be used against you. The government or the culture will try to find a way to make your God the problem. So these administrators devised a plan. They told Darius that, Darius, you're so wonderful, King Darius, that we need to solidify the people's allegiance to you. Now, by the way, nothing they're about to suggest was unusual. When new kings came in, they often did things like this. They said, let's make a law that for the next 30 days, this transition from the old line of kings to this new empire, for the next 30 days, no one is to say any prayer to any god or any human, I know that sounds odd, except to you, king. And again, that was normal to give this period of people stepping away from their old gods and now accepting a new god, which often included the king. Now, if anybody violates that law, then we will kill them by throwing them into the lion's den. Well, the law was signed. Darius didn't see anything wrong with it. This is a normal thing. Once signed, however, the Medes and the Persians had a rule. Once you signed a law, it could never be changed. It's rather like the toll on a highway. They'll tell you the toll is there to pay for constructing a highway, then we'll take it off whenever. It'll never go away. They knew Daniel prayed to his God 3 times a day in the open, on his balcony. Daniel knew the law, but he went ahead and prayed anyway. Daniel chapter 6 and verse 13. They said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah. Notice they didn't say the really wise man that helped the other kings understand things. No, he's an exile from Judah. He's a Jew. He pays no attention to you, your majesty, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. Well, Darius was distressed, but he had no power to change the law. Once written, never changed. Daniel, now nearly 80, was placed into the lion's den, a place reserved for the traitors, the worst of society. Then the next morning, starting at verse 19, every kid knows the story. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. When he came near the den, he called to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? Daniel answered, may the king live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They've not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done anything wrong before you, your majesty. The king was overjoyed. He gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. When Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. And then, of course, his accusers got thrown to the lions, so they got to eat. The story, however, there's something there which I want you to pay attention to as we wrap this up. Daniel didn't go, no, I'm not dead, you idiot. Why'd you throw me in here? We were friends. You knew how No, he didn't do any of that. He said, hey, I hope you're doing great. May the king live forever. Daniel held nothing against the king. You know why? Because he knew the king didn't know God, and because he knew he did. So whatever happened to Daniel, death or life, was going to be a win. He was at peace, and so much at peace that he didn't have to answer back, get snarky, attack, call down fire, or any of that. Daniel knew how to love his enemies and love them well. It's how we survive when our culture has left us. It's how we survive the waiting period between now and the resurrection of the king. There are going to be times when you're going to face the same dilemmas that Daniel did between loyalty to your culture and power centers and the possibility of bling and the like, or to your God. And there will be a cost if you choose God. Do not pine for the old days. Do not fear for tomorrow. Don't run away. Don't hide yourself from the culture. You can stand within it. Remember, Jesus in his prayer said, I do not ask you to take them out of the world, but to be with them in the world. Stay in the culture faithfully. Be good. Do good. Love your enemies. You may very well be changing history, the history of the world. Daniel did. Jesus did. And that same spirit is within us as we wait for our King. More next week.